Back in 2016, audiences watched Captain America's shield get ripped away mid-flight by a familiar stream of webbing. It was a massive crowd-pleasing moment, but behind the scenes, it represented an impossible corporate paradox. Sony Pictures has owned the film rights to Spider-Man since 1999. The Walt Disney Company owns the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In Hollywood, rival studios guarding billion-dollar intellectual properties do not share their toys. This flowchart breaks down the bizarre 2015 agreement that made the crossover happen. Sony retained full creative control and took home the box office profits. Disney gained the right to integrate Peter Parker into the Avengers, keeping the lucrative merchandising revenue. But mapping this backwards reveals a massive void. For nearly 4 decades, Marvel had zero ownership over its own crown jewel. Getting Spider-Man on screen took 40 years of legal chaos, corporate leverage, and desperate industry survival tactics. Back in the 1970s, Marvel's primary survival strategy involved freely licensing their characters to television networks. They handed properties over to CBS in America and struck a 4-year licensing deal with Japan's Toei company. The result was a low-budget live-action baseline for the hero, featuring actors like Nicholas Hammond fighting extortionists and mind control plots on a TV budget. Moving into the 1980s and 90s, the property sank into feature film development hell. The rights bounced between a rotating cast of now-defunct studios, from Canon Films to Carolco Pictures, burning through millions of dollars in unused scripts. By 1996, Marvel filed for bankruptcy. The film rights for Spider-Man were actively disputed across 5 different rival entities. After 2 years of litigation, the courts collapsed the web, voiding the contracts and returning the property to a restructure of Marvel. Needing cash, Marvel turned around in 1999 and sold the film rights to Sony for a mere $7 million. To clear the final legal hurdle, Sony compromised with MGM, trading away their claims on the James Bond franchise in exchange for full clearance on Spider-Man. $7 million secured the rights to the most profitable superhero in history. Marvel sold off their best asset right before the global box office completely exploded with comic book adaptations. Under Sony, director Sam Raimi's 2002 adaptation shattered box office records. Earning over $800 million globally, it set the modern template for Hollywood blockbusters. Starring Tobey Maguire, the trilogy became an undeniable cultural phenomenon, proving that comic book properties could dominate the summer multiplex. But Sony's ownership came with a strict perpetual condition. A use-it-or-lose-it clause required the studio to release a new Spider-Man film at least once every 5 years. If they missed the deadline, the rights would automatically revert back to Marvel. When creative differences caused Raimi's 4th Spider-Man film to collapse in 2010, that 5-year clock started ticking loudly. Sony had to rush a completely new version into production simply to keep their grip on the license. That corporate mandate gave us the Andrew Garfield era. The Amazing Spider-Man was born out of a legal deadline rather than natural creative development. The pressure only increased with the sequel. Sony stuffed The Amazing Spider-Man 2 with villains and spin-off setups, desperately trying to artificially engineer a massive cinematic universe to compete with the now juggernaut Marvel Studios. Forced to blindly churn out movies just to satisfy a legal contract, the franchise became a grueling mandatory treadmill. The rush to hit release dates diluted the storytelling, and box office returns began to severely underperform. The breaking point arrived in late 2014. A massive cyber attack on Sony's computer networks leaked confidential emails to the public. Those documents revealed that Sony executives, panicked over diminishing returns, were secretly negotiating with Marvel. Fans saw the leaked emails and demanded a crossover. The ensuing public relations nightmare forced Sony back to the negotiating table. In February 2015, they finalized the historic sharing agreement orchestrated by Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige. Tom Holland stepped into the role as the new face of this corporate compromise, officially bringing Peter Parker into the same universe as Iron Man and Thor. A devastating cyber attack and intense public backlash managed to accomplish what millions in legal fees never could. It forced 2 bitter industry rivals into a highly profitable symbiotic relationship. That partnership remains highly fragile. In 2019, Disney demanded equal co-financing and a larger share of the profits. Sony refused, and the agreement temporarily dissolved, pulling Spider-Man out of the MCU entirely until public outcry forced another renegotiation. To hedge their bets against this tension, Sony began aggressively expanding the property. Today, we have multiple concurrent timelines running at once: the live-action MCU films, Sony's tangent universe of anti-heroes like Venom, and the Oscar-winning animated Spider-Verse franchise. The entire concept of an animated multiverse works so well because audiences have spent 20 years watching different actors, directors, and studios try to exploit the exact same intellectual property. The history of Peter Parker on film is shaped directly by his corporate entanglements. In modern Hollywood, a character's journey is dictated just as much by restrictive legal paperwork as it is by radioactive spiders.